I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the final agenda?
There are no changes to the final agenda.
Thank you. Before moving to the agenda, I'd like to note that Commissioner Radina Valova is excused from today's session. That said, I'd now like to conduct a roll call of commissioners. When I call your name, please confirm that you are present. Commissioner James Alisi.
Present.
Commissioner David Valesky.
Present.
Commissioner John Majori.
Present.
Commissioner Jenna Bright.
Present.
Commissioner Denise Sheehan.
Present.
Thank you. Before we turn to the regular agenda, do any commissioners wish to recuse from voting on any of the regular agenda items? Commissioner Alisi.
No.
Commissioner Valesky.
No.
Commissioner Majori.
No.
Commissioner Bright.
No.
Commissioner Sheehan.
No.
Thank you. On to the regular agenda. Our first item for discussion, item 201, cases 15-E-0082, proceeding on motion of the Commission as to the policies, requirements, and conditions for implementing a community net metering program, and 19-M-0463 in the matter of consolidated billing for distributed energy resources. This item will be presented by Tom Dwyer, Carlene Pachelzek, Pete Sheehan, Richard Schuller, and Mike Suma are available for questions. Tom, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. Item 201 is a draft order addressing the staff proposal recommending utility performance metrics associated with the billing and crediting of customers enrolled in Community Distributed Generation, or CDG, programs. The draft order before you today recommends adoption of 2 performance metrics with associated negative revenue adjustments, or NRAs, designed to improve utility billing and crediting of CDG. These metrics address the timeliness of utility CDG billing and crediting to customers, as well as the timeliness of utility responses to customer allocation lists submitted by CDG hosts. I will first provide a brief background of the issues and processes that led to the draft order before you today, before turning to the recommendations made within the draft order. On December 12, 2019, the Commission adopted a net crediting model for consolidated billing of CDG subscriptions, allowing subscribers to receive a single bill combining the CDG subscription fee and the CDG credits generated. Net crediting simplifies the CDG billing process for customers and is less cumbersome than having to pay 2 separate energy bills. Following the implementation of net crediting, on September 15, 2022, the Commission issued an order establishing process regarding community distributed generation billing in response to concerns expressed by DPS staff and CDG stakeholders surrounding utility billing issues, including delays in automating CDG billing. These billing issues included subscribers not receiving the appropriate credits on their bills, as well as subscribers not receiving a utility bill for several months and then later receiving multiple bills within a short period, or a single very high bill for that extended period of time. Utility billing deficiencies also impacted some CDG sponsors' ability to bill and collect payments from the utilities and/or customers, which resulted in CDG sponsor capital issues and, in some instances, defaults on their contractual obligations. To address these issues, the Commission directed DPS staff to conduct a stakeholder conference to discuss the potential benefits of establishing CDG billing and crediting performance metrics to track and evaluate utilities' performance in billing for CDG, with potential NRAs tied to those metrics. DPS staff conducted stakeholder conferences on November 9, 2022 and February 27, 2023, where presentations were given by industry stakeholders, including CDG developers, utilities, and community choice aggregation administrators. Building on the proposals and discussions that arose out of those stakeholder conferences, DPS staff developed the staff proposal to address ongoing CDG billing issues. The staff proposal included 6 recommended annual performance metrics with associated NRAs and proposed a reporting regime to track utility billing and crediting performance on a monthly basis. Notably, the draft order only recommends adoption of 2 of those 6 performance metrics, and there are several reasons for this. First, the draft order recognizes that utility CDG billing and crediting performance has improved significantly since the order initiating this process in 2022. Utilities have almost completely automated CDG billing processes, which has reduced the errors associated with what were manual processes. Additionally, the volume of complaints received by the department related to CDG billing issues has decreased significantly since 2022. Second, the draft order recognizes the costs associated with modifications to utility billing systems and seeks to strike a fair balance between requiring the enhancements necessary for improved billing and crediting performance while not adopting such arduous requirements that would further increase costs ultimately borne by customers and result in only limited incremental improvements. And third, the draft order would adopt a phased approach whereby 2 performance metrics would be adopted now, utility performance would be tracked for at least 1 year, and then utility performance will be reevaluated to determine if additional measures are warranted. This approach allows the Commission to act now, implementing these 2 performance metrics immediately, instead of waiting until the utilities have the capabilities and necessary data to implement additional metrics. Moreover, it could be the case that additional metrics are ultimately not needed. So turning to the metrics adopted in the draft order today. The first addresses the timeliness of CDG billing and crediting, and this metric would track the percentage of customers that receive their bill within 75 days of the end of the host account billing cycle. If more than 5% of bills that month are not issued within that time frame, the utility would be assessed with an NRA. Also tied to this metric is a $10 credit that would be furnished by the utility to any customer that does not receive their bill within that same 75-day period for each month the bill remains late. The second metric adopted by the draft order measures the number of days it takes the utility to respond to host allocation list submissions. Host allocation lists are the lists sent to the utility indicating which customers have subscribed to the CDG project and their corresponding savings rates. These lists are crucial in the CDG process to ensure that subscribers receive accurate credits, and the proposed performance metric would require utilities to respond to host allocation list submissions within 5 business days with a corresponding NRA if more than 5% of those allocation list submissions are not responded to in that time frame. And I'll note that this 5-day time frame is drawn from the host allocation guidance document that was previously developed in the CDG billing and crediting working group, and which is attached to the draft order as Appendix C. DPS staff believes that these 2 metrics will address some of the most critical issues surrounding utility CDG billing and crediting, and will incent the necessary improvements to utility billing and crediting processes to ensure successful program implementation in the future. The draft order also includes quarterly and annual reporting requirements to transparently track utility performance. The quarterly reporting of monthly data will allow staff and stakeholders to identify any remaining CDG billing issues early on. The draft order would require utilities to implement quality assurance measures to ensure the accuracy of their reported data and would permit DPS staff to audit the utility's reporting. Recognizing that there may be factors outside the utility's control that impact their CDG billing and crediting performance, the draft order would allow for a waiver process whereby utilities could file a waiver petition to have their performance results for a given period modified. Any such petition would need to identify the extraordinary nature of the event, the impact of the event on the utility's CDG billing and crediting service quality, the reason why reasonable preparations for the event proved inadequate, and the specific days affected by the event. As I mentioned earlier, the draft order includes a review process and directs DPS staff to convene a stakeholder conference following the first year of implementation to evaluate utility CDG billing and crediting performance and determine, based on the data collected, whether additional metrics should be adopted. Finally, to address utility costs associated with implementing these performance metrics, including mechanisms to track performance, the draft order would authorize an increase of 0.5% to the 1% fee that utilities receive from the value generated by the CDG project, making the new administrative discount rate 1.5%. Utilities would also be permitted to defer the revenue requirement impact of prudent, necessary, and incremental costs in excess of the amounts recovered through the discount rate, subject to staff review and future proceedings. This concludes my presentation on item 201, and staff is available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for the presentation and the work behind this order before us today. I think it's safe to say, and I think we can all agree, that accurate and consistent billing is essential towards any financial relationship, particularly that of the utilities and their customers. And this improvement, this incremental change, driven through a variety of stakeholder engagements and feedback, I think is moving in the right direction towards providing those benefits to our customers. I think these provisions are going to encourage the right behavior from the utilities, while also compensating customers should utility behavior not align with our expectations. So appreciate the work. I think this is going to be in the best interest of CDG customers, and I look forward to it progressing. Thank you. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation as well as the information that we received during the briefings. It's all very valuable to us as we make our decisions, and I think based on that, it makes sense to move forward now with these two metrics and perhaps even learn something as we go along. So I'll be supportive of this.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom, for the presentation, and to the whole team for the work on this item. Just a very brief comment. It strikes me as this may be one of those items where the stakeholders who participated may be somewhat disappointed by what is not in the order than what is in the order. As you indicated in your presentation, even though there were 6 initial recommendations in the staff white paper, I think you've done a great job and made recommendations that I'm certainly willing to support, that we would move forward with only 2 of those 6 at this time. So thanks for taking the time to clarify that, and to those who may be disappointed that there's not more here, I certainly am satisfied that what is here is meaningful and will make a significant difference. So thank you for that, and I will be supporting the item.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. I would just echo the sentiments expressed by the chair and Commissioners Alisi and Valesky. I do have one question, which is, with this order, we're saying that while we're not implementing all 6 original metrics, we will continue to track performance and leave the door open to impose additional metrics and NRAs in the future. And, my understanding based on my reading of the order, part of the reason for this is the joint utilities contention that many of the mechanisms needed to track the NRA metrics are not currently in place in the utilities billing systems. But as a result of our continued tracking, if we reach the conclusion that additional metrics and NRAs are warranted without the JUs preparing to update their mechanisms, wouldn't we be left in the same place we are today?
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know if I would say we would be left in the same place we are today. Ultimately, the 2 performance metrics proposed in the draft order would require utility billing system upgrades and would, impose some costs that are ultimately borne by ratepayers. I think, staff's thinking was to take this phased approach, which was supported by other industry stakeholders, to really determine if those additional costs are worth spending in the future, determine if it's warranted to implement those additional metrics. I will also note, too, that while the draft order does not recommend an accuracy metric, it still does direct the tracking of the accuracy of credits. So that will also require probably some, upgrades by the utility to do that tracking. And we will probably be a little bit ahead of where we are today, even just having that data a year from now.
Thank you very much. I am in support of this item.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, team, for this presentation. So at first, like some of my fellow commissioners, I was a little surprised that we were only adopting 2 out of the 6 recommendations. But as you mentioned, many of the problems that we were seeing have seen improvement with the greater automation. And I'm encouraged that we will continue to monitor this situation and continue working with the CDG billing and crediting working group, and then take action as needed. But I was also concerned that many of the reporting metrics were seen by the joint utilities, from a joint utility standpoint, as sort of too difficult, despite the fact that many of them had just recently built up more advanced systems for greater automation. So can you just dive a little bit deeper into that as to why the joint utilities updated systems were not in a position to accommodate the metrics that we were looking for?
Yeah, and this will be repeating what the utilities communicated to staff via comments and in meetings. It really has to do with, the companies some of them have upgraded their billing system, but these tracking of these data points, implementing these metrics were not really on the table at that time. So that wasn't worked into the work plan with the contractors and stuff that build these platforms. So it's going to need to be something that's an add-on, essentially, is the way the utilities described it.
They would have to do additional programming to collect the information needed to calculate the accuracy of the bills, on top of the information they would have to extract to do the timeliness of the bills. They currently are tracking timeliness, some of them only manually, but it's a much easier lift than to calculate the actual accuracy.
That makes sense. So it's a programming issue and having to program more into the system. Yeah. Well, I look forward to the successful rollout of this program and the upcoming sequence of quarterly reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, Carleen, Pete, Richard, Mike, for your work on this. As always, it comes through the order how much work has gone into this. I also am very appreciative to the efforts of the stakeholders, the JU. Clearly, there's people have rolled up their sleeves to try to work on this. So I always try to take a step back when we get these orders, like what are we trying to do? So first, can you just briefly just explain, what types of projects will be most impacted by this order?
Sure. So, the community distributed generation program as a whole, a majority of those are community solar projects throughout the state. There are some hydro projects that also participate in CDG, but it's mostly those community solar projects that also participate in net crediting, and that's the consolidated billing program of for CDG, having the utility issue one bill on behalf of the CDG of the CDG host. So it's those CDG programs that are involved in net crediting.
Okay, thanks. So do we have a sense of how many people are subscribing to these CDG programs now?
Yeah, looked that up this morning, and as of last year, it was approximately 224,000 customers across the state were enrolled in CDG program.
Okay, great. So, as Commissioner Bright highlighted, always surprised when the staff puts forward 6 recommendations and we come down to 2. But I think, can you just help me and maybe dive a little deeper in how these 2 in particular are going to help drive and advance community solar and CDG more generally? What about these 2 really jumped out as, we expect to see some change?
I'll start with the second one regarding the host allocation lists. As I had mentioned in the presentation, that is making sure that those lists are accurate is a really important step in setting up all the billing processes that flow from that. If the allocation list is wrong, the bills are going to be wrong. So that step to staff, that was a really key step to make sure that those are being communicated effectively and that the utilities are responding to those timely so that if there are issues, they're resolved quickly. Another thing I'll know that is included in the draft order is since this process initiated, a lot of the utilities have created portals to exchange these lists of information, which has made the process a lot smoother. So we're hoping that we can remove the issues associated with the host allocation list that will have a kind of a upstream impact on improving the accuracy of bills going forward. And the timeliness metric for the billing really addresses, I think, the main frustration that customers were experiencing with CDG. There's a really great value proposition in enrolling in a CDG program, and a lot of customers then felt frustrated when they weren't receiving a utility bill for an extended period of time. And really, their thinking was it was the program's fault that was causing these issues. So ensuring that customers get timely bills and then providing a mechanism for compensation when things happen and they don't will hopefully improve that customer experience and reduce that kind of that negative viewpoint of CDG program to make more customers willing to enroll and stay in the program.
Thanks, Tom. I think that's very helpful. And again, stepping back, what we're trying to do here is increase confidence in these programs and get more customers to sign up, and to advance our community solar program, other CDG technologies, and help give savings to customers. So I'm confident that these two are a good place to start. I'm happy that the order keeps the door open and that this engagement that you guys have really driven will continue, and we will, I think through this and continued efforts, continue to look for ways to improve the program and to keep our eye on what's happening with these programs. So again, thank you for your efforts. Thank you to all the stakeholders, the JU, and everyone for participating in this. And I'll be supporting the order.
Thank you. And with that, we'll do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation contained in the draft order as discussed. Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. We'll now move on to our second discussion item for today. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everyone. Our second item, item 201, related to cases 14-M-0565, proceeding on the motion of the Commission to examine programs to address energy affordability for low-income utility customers, and 23-M-0298 in the matter of budget appropriations to enhance energy affordability programs. This item will be presented today by Tom Kazmarek, which I believe this is your first time presenting, so congrats, welcome. Richard Berkeley and Dave Drexler will be available for questions. So, Tom, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. Today I will be presenting item 202, which addresses an enhanced energy affordability policy, or enhanced EAP, which would provide utility bill discounts to gas and electric utility customers below median income who do not qualify for existing low-income energy affordability policy programs, or EAPs, in order to lower household energy burdens to no more than 6%. Before I begin, I want to note the Commission's strong history of advancing affordability initiatives for low to moderate income, or LMI, utility customers. Notably, the Commission issued an order in May 2016 requiring large investor-owned electric and gas distribution utilities to establish EAPs. Then between 2021 and 2023, the Commission advanced program refinements to reach more customers and established an EAP working group to advise the Commission on matters relating to EAP and to address energy affordability issues emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic. Most recently, the Commission advanced an energy affordability guarantee pilot to affordably electrify low-income homes and approved over $1.5 billion to fund energy efficiency and building electrification programs targeted to the LMI market segment. The order before you today builds on the Commission's prior actions and reinforces New York's leadership in utility affordability programs for LMI households. By way of background, the fiscal year 2024 New York State budget included a provision requiring department staff, in consultation with the EAP Working Group, to establish a new, expanded discount program for residential utility customers who do not currently qualify for the existing utility EAPs, but whose income is below the state median income, or SMI, thereby creating an enhanced energy affordability policy. The department was also tasked to consider the feasibility of using area median income, or AMI, in the event the use of SMI prevents reaching all households in some areas of the state that have an energy burden greater than 6%. I want to pause and clarify what I mean by an energy burden, as well as the origin of the 6% figure. The term is defined as the percentage of a customer's income that is spent on energy. In the May 2016 order establishing EAPs, the Commission established a target energy burden at or below 6% for low-income households in New York, reasoning no more than 30% of household income should be spent on shelter costs, and no more than 20% of those shelter costs should be spent on utility costs. In response to the directive in the state budget, staff consulted with the EAP Working Group to conduct analyses and discuss key elements of an expanded bill discount program that would extend this target maximum energy burden to all households below median income and provide commensurate bill discounts to qualifying households. This work included an assessment of benefit programs with potential overlapping eligibility, research of moderate income EAPs in other states, and modeling to estimate the number of eligible utility customers, discount levels, and potential utility budget and ratepayer impacts. Subsequently, and informed by these working group deliberations, staff developed and filed a staff report and straw proposal on March 18th of this year that outlined recommendations for the development of an enhanced EAP, including parameters for utility-managed bill discount programs for these households. Specific design and implementation considerations in the staff report included program integration, customer eligibility, enrollment processes, benefit levels, utility budget levels and bill impacts, program evaluation mechanisms, and opportunities for coordination with other programs. Importantly, staff proposed the first 2 years of the program would be leveraged as a pilot period in order to collect and analyze information to inform potential future modifications. The enhanced EAP would be integrated within the structural framework of low-income EAPs to lessen administrative burden, and for other factors I will discuss shortly. Staff's proposal would extend eligibility to residential electric and gas utility customers, regardless of use type, whose incomes are below SMI but who otherwise do not qualify for the low-income EAP discounts, except for utility customers residing in New York City, which would base eligibility on AMI. Staff's proposal would further direct additional data collection and analysis during the 2-year pilot period to determine whether the use of SMI or AMI in utility territories would help more households not exceed the 6% energy burden. Given the current lack of robust data match opportunities for the pool of eligible households, staff's proposal would require utilities to establish a self-registration process, leverage information clearinghouses to verify customer eligibility, and begin enrolling customers later this year. Staff further proposed additional work be done by utilities and by staff in the EAP Working Group to identify opportunities for eligibility verification and automatic enrollment. Staff's proposal would establish 3 enhanced EAP benefit tiers based on income below 60% median income, in line with the low-income EAP, between 60 and 80% median income, a group typically defined as moderate income, and between 80 and 100% median income. Benefits for each tier would be established on an annual basis by calculating the difference between average bills and the 6% energy burden for an average customer in each tier and in each utility territory. Customers below 60% median income would receive a benefit equivalent to EAP Tier 1, whereas benefits in higher tiers would be calculated in the same manner as low-income EAP tiers. Also, similar to the low-income EAPs, minimum discounts would be established. On budget levels, staff proposed that budgets between low-income EAPs and enhanced EAPs would be set at no more than 3% of revenues collectively, with the opportunity for utilities to petition for temporary collective budget cap adjustments up to 3.5% of revenues if the potential need is demonstrated. Staff's proposal would further require continued exploration of alternative funding resources to minimize ratepayer impact. Staff further proposed utilities collect geolocational data during the 2-year pilot period to inform future modifications to enhance the APs, including consideration of whether more targeted use of AMI or SMI would help more households not exceed the target energy burden. Staff's proposal further recommends collection activity be reported on enrolled customers to monitor enhanced EAP's impact on arrears. Finally, staff's proposal would require further staff engagement with other agencies, most notably the New York State Department of Health, Department of Tax and Finance, Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, and NYSERDA to identify means to leverage existing data to maximize program enrollments and operational efficiencies. The draft order before you approves the implementation of enhanced EAP, as outlined in the staff report, with modifications based on stakeholder input. 6 parties filed comments on the staff report, including the Public Utility Law Project, the New York State Utilities, National Fuel Gas, the City of New York, Alliance for a Green Economy, and AARP New York. Regarding program design, the draft order adopts staff's proposal to extend benefits to gas and electric customers, regardless of use type, and establishes minimum benefits for customers who enroll, meet the income eligibility requirements, and do not currently receive EAP benefits. The draft order requires operating budgets and budget caps for enhanced EAPs to operate independent of low-income EAPs, setting enhanced EAP budgets at 0.5% of revenues and low-income EAP budgets at 2.5% of revenues. Additionally, the draft order directs utilities regulated by the Commission and serving customers in New York City as well as Nassau County to use AMI to determine those customers' income eligibility during the pilot period, whereas all other areas will use SMI while further data is collected to determine the appropriate criterion to help more households not exceed the energy burden target. The draft order also requires utilities to begin enrollment no more than 6 months from the issuance of the order, except for Central Hudson and National Fuel, which must begin enrollment in no more than 9 months and subject to demonstrated need. Finally, the draft order clarifies that staff should continue collaboration with the EAP working group to explore centralized data opportunities to automatically identify and enroll eligible utility customers into EAPs, and for staff to identify the potential for combining the income verification needs of LMI energy efficiency, building electrification, and clean energy programs. In closing, this policy provides an important tool to help more households not exceed a 6% energy burden, while collecting important data and insights to potentially effectuate future program modifications. Staff expects that the expansion of utility bill discount programs to more households, the concurrent assessment of opportunities for automation, and geolocational data collected during the pilot period will move New York closer to achieving its utility affordability goals. This concludes my presentation, and Richard Berkeley, Dave Drexler, and I are available for any questions.
Chair, excuse me, this is Michelle. I just wanted to step in because there's some concern that perhaps the wrong case number may have been mentioned. So I just want to clarify that this discussion, the presentation that was just had, concerned item 202, cases 14M0565, proceeding on motion of the Commission to examine programs to address energy affordability for low-income customers, and Case 23M0298 in the matter of budget appropriations to enhance energy affordability programs. I just wanted to erase any doubt that there was any misstatement as to the item number or the case numbers, and hopefully clarify the transcript in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Tom and team, thank you for the work here. As you iterated, the Public Service Commission has a long-standing goal that no New Yorker should spend more than 6% of their household income on energy. And I see today's action as a landmark step forward in supporting affordability in general and that specific goal. We expand benefits to more New Yorkers, and we're taking proactive action to address the ever-growing concerns of affordability faced by both electric and gas customers, which I think is critically important. And with this expanded policy, we expand our reach to more households who previously may have been excluded from this vital support because they didn't meet legacy criteria, even though they were still struggling to pay their bills. So ultimately, I see this as a benefit. More New Yorkers will be able to afford to keep the lights on, their homes heated and cooled, and ultimately their families safe and secure. So thank you for your work in putting this together and advancing this item. That said, Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Tom. It's nice to see you again. We miss you up there on the 20th floor. This flows very nicely with the Commission's history of affordability initiatives for low to moderate income customers, and I'm happy to support the continuance of that approach. Oh, by the way, thanks for the large print.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom, and to your team for putting this item together. And also, I do want to acknowledge not only the past history of the Commission, but specifically the governor and the legislature in the 2024 state budget made some very important decisions at that time that certainly set us all off on this path. And that very real realization that affordability, energy affordability affects everyone. And certainly well beyond those who qualify for the existing EAP programs. The only thing I don't have a question, but I would just encourage you to take seriously something that you included in your presentation today. I've, over the years, have had a number of opportunities in former roles to create new programs in state government. And quite often, programs that are developed through sound and practical reality don't always reach all of the New Yorkers that they are intended to reach. So, Tom, when you say that the staff of DPS is going to work closely with the Health Department, the Department of Taxation and Finance, OTDA, and NYSERDA to leverage existing data to maximize program enrollments, please do that. And please do that aggressively because that's the way that we make sure that this program actually will reach everyone who will qualify. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Majora.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for your presentation, and thank you, everybody who worked on this. I don't have anything else to say other than what's already been said, and I don't have any questions. I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bryant.
Thank you, Tom and team. I think this is an excellent action that we're taking right now, and especially that it's not going to be drawing from the pool that's used that is used by people who are in the standard energy affordability program. So I think that that's great. I'd like to just have a quick question on stacking. So I know that we're going to be coordinating with other agencies, as Commissioner Valesky just mentioned. But how about, and I think in this, certainly in the order and in your presentation, I think you mentioned coordinating with other proceedings. And what I'm getting at here is that ultimately, it's not just about paying someone's bill, but bringing that bill down to a level that is manageable for each individual household. So that can include a variety of things, but including efforts that, like, we're undertaking within the EEBE programs for our low and moderate income EEBE program. So can you give me a sense a little bit more about how we're working with our other proceedings to meet that 6% energy burden in a way that's not just paying that bill, but stacking our other efforts?
Thank you for the question, commissioners, and I just wanted to respond, hopefully not at too much length. So with the concept of stacking, which I'm sure you're familiar with from the area of housing, which of course is deeply related to use of utilities, we'll be working internally with the team on EEBE to see what possibilities there are to stack that internally at DPS. But there are also other programs at the health department and at some of our sister agencies that we haven't had in-depth discussions with those agencies about to this point. And we also anticipate that they will be thinking about new types of things to do with the instability in federal funding that we're all facing as a state. I guess last, and trying not to speak too much about this because we'll come back and have this discussion with the commission, I would assume, in the not too distant future. The Energy Affordability Working Group that was created as a result of an order from the commission about 5 years ago during COVID has already begun discussing what other types of programs can be overlaid with the EAP and the EEAP, and for that matter also the Energy Guarantee, the three programs, two of which are new to the commission and to the state, because achieving affordability and maintaining affordability is an important goal of the state, as you said, Commissioner Valesky, announced by the governor and by the legislature. And we think that looking through all of the possible ways that we can do that without deepening the draw on ratepayers' wallets is very important.
Thank you so much for that response. I will, of course, be supporting this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, and to the staff team for your work on this, on the presentation and on the order. I also want to thank the EAP working group that we have relied on a great deal, and as Richard just articulated, are going to continue to rely on. But I really, time after time, as the working group, initiatives come before us, it's clear that there's a lot of thought and, a thoughtful approach that's brought by that group. So I want to give kudos to them as well. Tom, I just had one additional question beyond what my fellow commissioners raised, and that's how we do income verification for these programs and what, how that might change down the road. What advancements are we looking for? Just if you could just talk to that a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. And just to clarify, we're talking about the enhanced EAP program before you?
Yes.
So for these purposes, staff define a clearinghouse as a qualified entity that performs confidential data analytics to essentially determine whether or not a customer would reasonably fit within the program parameters. So the draft order before you provides some flexibility for utilities to identify what that is, but they need to report to the commission in order for whichever verification process they end up using is implemented.
Okay, thank you. So just want to share, as my fellow commissioners have raised, affordability, certainly a challenge that we're all facing. Anyone who's participated in a public statement hearing recently on utility rate cases, even in the past year, knows that affordability is top of mind. This order will help to provide relief to utility customers with incomes below the statewide median income, consistent with the requirements of the state fiscal year 24 budget. I support the order, but I do want to note, and I would be remiss if I didn't note this, that while this expanded EAP program was required by the legislature, no funding was appropriated to support it. I agree with some of the commenters that it would be preferable for this program to be paid for with funding sources other than ratepayer funds. So I just want to put that out there because the pie is only so big. And nonetheless, I do support the order. I do think this is an initiative that I support, and it's consistent with the goals of the commission and the department. But I just wanted to note that because I think it's an important point. Also, just finally, thanks again to the staff and to the EAP working group members.
Thank you. With that, I'll do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations contained in the draft order we discussed. And Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
And Commissioner Sheen?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved. Recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone. We will now move to our third and final item for discussion today. Do we need to do some musical chairs? Maybe. All right. Item 301, case 22-E-0633, in the matter of the New York Independent System Operator proposed public policy transmission needs for consideration for 2022. This item will be presented by Elizabeth Grisaru, with Jessica Waldorf and Jalila Aisi available for questions. Please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. The draft order before you marks the end of an effort the Commission initiated in 2023 to plan and build transmission infrastructure in support of offshore wind resources, but does not abandon the Commission's commitment to building clean energy resources and a decarbonized electric grid. This effort began in a time period when offshore wind development in New York Bight was robust, and there were enough lease areas and generation projects in the pipeline to see a pathway to meeting the state's 2035 goal for 9 gigawatts of offshore wind supply. To serve these future generators, the Commission invoked the public policy transmission planning process under the New York Independent System Operators Tariff. This initiative grew out of the 2020 Power Grid Study, which recommended routing approximately 6 gigawatts of the 9 gigawatt target to the New York City grid. The public policy process is a tool that allows the Commission to identify a need for cost-effective bulk transmission projects that is driven by state policies set out in statute or regulation, such as the climate policies codified in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, known as the CLCPA. The Commission has used this tool several times, most recently to seek transmission enhancements on Long Island, the ongoing work that is referred to now as the New York Propel Project. Under the NYSOS process, the Commission determines whether there is a qualifying need for transmission, called a Public Policy Transmission Need, or PPTN, and the NYSO carries out a competitive solicitation for solutions. The NYSO board selects the most efficient or cost-effective solution based on the NYSO staff's analysis. The successful project then becomes eligible for cost recovery and cost allocation under a NYSO tariff. Based on the Power Grid Study recommendations, the Commission moved to seek competitive proposals for transmission to serve future offshore wind generation. At the time, in 2023, NYSERDA's offshore wind procurements were proceeding at a pace that suggested the 9 gigawatts might be achievable by 2035. While the offshore wind projects that received NYSERDA contracts were designed to interconnect radially, the proposed PPTN transmission would have the capacity to interconnect the balance of the energy needed to meet the target, which staff calculated at the time was approximately 4.7 gigawatts. To meet the 2035 target date, the Commission required transmission proposals to enter service by January 2033. The NYSO launched the solicitation in 2024 28 qualifying proposals were received. The estimated costs of the proposed projects vary from $7.9 to $23.9 billion. The NYSO is on track to present its recommendations to the board by the end of this year. As the process was underway, in January 2025, the Trump administration issued the first of many executive orders and actions that created immense uncertainty for the offshore wind industry and for renewable resources generally. The first such action was a presidential memorandum that halted any further federal leasing or permitting activity for offshore wind resources for an indefinite period of time. While that memorandum is phrased in terms of a pause, there is no certainty as to when and where offshore wind generation development may resume. There have been several subsequent actions targeting the offshore wind industry, including imposing and lifting a stop work order on one of New York's projects now in active construction, Empire Wind 1, withdrawing previously issued permits, and more recently, phasing out federal tax credits for wind projects. The federal government's actions mean that the assumptions supporting the original PPTN finding no longer hold. Only 2 contracted projects are now under construction. All of the others have canceled. Staff does not expect any additional generation to be developed in the New York Bight until federal policy changes. And even if the federal government resumes its support of the industry in a few years, projects will likely not be operational by 2035. Further, this federal pause on generation permitting suggests that a transmission project intended to serve offshore wind would not receive the necessary federal permits either. Without certainty that offshore wind generation will be available in the time frame assumed in 2023, staff recommends that the Commission withdraw the original PPTN determination. This step is contemplated under the NYSO tariff and will stop the NYSO's evaluation and selection process. Otherwise, the NYSO would proceed to designate a project, and the successful project developer would be entitled, under FERC rate-making principles, to begin recovering costs from New York ratepayers. Staff has concluded that allowing a transmission developer to begin charging New York ratepayers for a project that is no longer needed to serve generation in the time frame originally assumed presents too much risk. Staff considered multiple options to extend the in-service date or limit the project's development expenditures. All of these options would require the NYSO to restart the process and would also require this Commission to revisit the 2023 project design and performance criteria without any certainty as to the future configuration of offshore wind resources. The result is exposing ratepayers to the risk that the 2023 project design and cost assumptions may not actually meet the state's future offshore wind needs. Thus, staff believes the prudent course is to stop the current NYSO evaluation and to plan proactively for the resumption of offshore wind infrastructure development at a point in the future when there is greater certainty of a strong and supportive federal partnership. It is an unavoidable fact that major public infrastructure projects such as the New York City PPTN require a shared vision and partnership between state and federal authorities. Under the present circumstances, to avoid exposing New York ratepayers to unnecessary costs, the proposed order recommends withdrawing the Commission's 2023 determination of a need for offshore transmission driven by public policy requirements. However, the draft order notes the Commission remains strongly committed to the continued development of the offshore wind industry. Offshore wind remains an important clean energy resource for the state. The draft order also notes that the current model may not be the optimal model for developing offshore wind transmission infrastructure, especially given the uncertainty facing the offshore wind industry and the experience gained in developing the PPTN up to this point. For these reasons, the draft order directs DPS staff to consider the lessons learned from the current New York City PPTN process and to explore approaches to planning offshore wind generation and transmission infrastructure that will reduce project development risk, promote cost-effective solutions, and maximize reliability and affordability benefits to the state's ratepayers. Staff, in coordination with NYSERDA and many other agencies, have spent well over a decade to build an offshore wind industry in New York State to meet the state and commission's clean energy goals. New York is a leader in the offshore wind industry with one project in commercial operation, the nation's first utility-scale offshore wind farm, 2 in active construction, and major progress to show in workforce development efforts, regional planning, including through the Northeast States Transmission Collaborative, and supply chain investment. New York remains at the forefront of the U.S. wind industry. The draft order also recognizes the role that offshore wind was expected to play in meeting New York City's reliability needs and supporting the decarbonization of the existing power generation fleet. With federal action taking this resource off the table for the foreseeable future, New York will have to adjust to a changed reality while continuing to explore all feasible and cost-effective options to meeting the objectives of reliability and decarbonization. To this end, the draft order recognizes the importance of identifying the clean energy solutions that will help meet reliability needs in New York City and direct staff in coordination with both NYSERDA and the NYSO to identify potential supply solutions in the next Clean Energy Standard Biennial Review scheduled to be issued in 2026, and to continue the ongoing work to identify necessary transmission solutions through the coordinated grid planning process. This work will address reliability needs and position the state to access this important resource in the future when policymakers at both state and federal levels align again on its value to the energy system. The last 7 months have shown how the lack of a supportive federal partner impacts the state's objectives and our efforts to develop this industry. The draft order before you today is a strategic decision to protect New York State ratepayers from bearing the significant costs of building a large transmission facility without the assurance of when generation resources will be built to utilize it and deliver power to the grid. The draft order also directs further process to ensure flexibility to continue progress in offshore wind development as soon as conditions allow, while keeping the focus on reliability and affordability. This decision is not an abandonment of our efforts to decarbonize the energy sector. Instead, it is the termination of one transmission procurement process necessitated by the federal government's suspension of offshore permitting activity. Without knowing when and where offshore wind generation will be available, it would be irresponsible to commit ratepayers to invest in a multi-billion-dollar transmission project whose sole purpose to connect future offshore wind projects with the New York grid has been frustrated by the federal government's actions. With that, my colleagues Jessica Waldorf and Jalila Icy are here to answer your questions.
Thank you for the presentation. We find ourselves in an unfortunate position due to events outside and beyond our control. What we've seen over the last several months from the federal government hasn't been a simple change in policy, but a wholesale departure from long-established norms. And it's a reflection of something deeper and a new reality that we, as commissioners, must take into consideration when making decisions, and the rest of the state as well. There was a time when I think the worst we could expect from the federal government was indifference or maybe benign neglect. But today we're faced with managing what can only be described as a deliberate and systematic action designed to dismantle decades of effort, decades of planning, and decades of progress. As you've highlighted, progress at the scale that we're talking about here in New York is only possible through sustained collaboration between the state and our federal partners. And we see examples of this throughout New York State in our abundant hydropower resources and assets throughout upstate New York. But we also see it in the Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, the Tennessee Valley Authority, big, massive generational projects foundational to American economic growth. Growth through the development of massive infrastructure projects that have helped shape the last century and fueled a steady drumbeat of technological innovation that has improved our overall quality of life. And today, when it comes to offshore wind, we are without that federal partner that we've long worked with. And absent that partnership with the federal government, absent that unified clarity of purpose, absent policy that is both stable and consistent at the federal level, there can be neither shared commitment nor a shared set of goals. And frankly, that puts, as you've stated, New York and New York ratepayers in an incredibly risky position. Offshore wind is unique in that the federal government has direct permitting and financial role. And the federal government has repeatedly and deliberately withdrawn its support. So for this reason, we at the Commission cannot in good conscience ask New York ratepayers to shoulder the cost and risk of a project where we know we'll be stymied going forward. This is a tough decision. And there are moments in life when you make a tough decision that the meaning is far greater than the matter itself. And I think today's decision is one of those. In withdrawing this determination, I think it's important to clarify and amplify that we are neither turning away from our climate targets nor our ambition to lead in clean energy. Nor is this commission foreclosing on the determination that a future public policy need may be needed in a future point in time when we are better aligned with our federal partners, when we can better count on consistency, predictability, and certainty at the federal level in financing, permitting, and leasing. Because despite the action we are taking today, one fact remains unchanged. The need and benefits of offshore wind remains as important today as they were when we first developed our plans many years ago. But the reality is, and the harsh reality of it, we have to acknowledge that the actions of the federal government will make it impossible to advance these efforts with a reasonable expectation of success. Now, one thing I'm grateful for, and this is something I've learned since joining the Commission from staff and others, it's always good to incorporate flexibility in Commission actions in the face of unforeseen events like this one. And as Liz has described, the PPTN process was no different. I've heard from many since the release of our agenda, suggesting that we explore a wide array of options. And these are options that we've received in comments, options I've received in letters, text messages, phone calls, voice messages. Many of them call for modifying the terms of the agreements, changing the timelines, or a variety of other parameters. And we've explored these. We've looked at these options. But all of these alternatives share a combination of flaws, be they legal, regulatory, economic, or technical in nature. And ultimately, these alternatives are non-viable. They're impossible to implement, or they expose ratepayers to significant costs and risk. And while exploring these various alternatives, I often found myself being reminded of the many criticisms we've experienced over the last few years regarding the state's overall climate policies. Arguments that the technologies are unfit. Arguments that ultimately the costs are too great, and that decisions are being made that aren't prudent. And time again, we've rebutted these arguments. We've highlighted how through careful planning, we found least cost solutions to meeting our objectives, how we found a way to balance affordability, reliability, and a clean energy transition responsibly. But in this instance, in continuing to pursue a solution to this PPTN, especially when the development of an offshore wind resource to connect it to is impossible without federal support, ultimately it defies the principles of good governance, those very principles through which this commission functions. Further, inaction today would only serve to strengthen our critics' arguments that we pursue projects with no discernible benefits to ratepayers and at too significant a cost. So how do we move forward? Well, we spent the last decade plus developing and executing on plans to deploy offshore wind, plans that today have been negatively impacted by federal actions. And it's important to point out those actions extend well beyond the borders of New York State. Other states have already canceled their plans for offshore wind in the near term. And since the President's executive order earlier this year, the offshore wind industry has made massive cuts to employees and abandoned long-planned multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects up and down the East Coast. Put another way, if each of our actions, if each part of our plan for addressing climate change is part of a puzzle, the federal action today has ultimately shifted the table upon which that puzzle is being built. And in the process, we've not only lost a few pieces, but some of the pieces no longer fit as snugly as they once did. Offshore wind is one piece of that puzzle. It is a key component of the Commission's efforts. And as I've said many times in many venues, our efforts are not founded on a singular technology or approach, but we look at solving the problem of climate change through a constellation of supporting efforts, through a carefully developed plan, a plan put together piece by piece, like solving a puzzle. So, I look at today's decision as a responsible action, a necessary action. We cannot have ratepayers fund projects that do not advance our goals in a responsible manner, in a timely manner. And today's decision is reflective of that. We need to look ahead. We need to see how we can best continue our efforts. And we need to use this time to reflect on how to reset our approach to develop the valuable, critical resource that is offshore wind. We must also examine the delivery and procurement models that match the capital intensity and significance and complexity and risk associated with these projects. In time, the winds of national policy will shift, and when they do, we will be ready. But in the meantime, we have to focus our attention on building the clean energy infrastructure we can to advance to completion, while remaining focused on progress towards meeting the state's goals. So with that, I support this item. I'm not happy with this item, but I support it because I see it as a necessity. So again, thank you for your work in bringing this to the Commission today. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure this is a bitter pill to swallow for some, but the point is made very clearly in this report that in this effort, there is a serious lack of a federal partnership, and the point in this report is made even more clearly that the prudent course is to stop for the obvious reasons, and I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments and your summary of your position on this item. Liz and Jessica and Jaleesa, thank you for all your work. I'm sure there's a lot of work that goes into all of the items that you prepare. Then there's the additional work, I'm sure, that went into this item that may have less to do with crossing T's and dotting I's and more to do with feelings and emotions and all of that. And I get that. I think you did a tremendous job in your presentation, Liz. I think you did a tremendous job in writing this order, and I do encourage, it will be posted relatively soon for those who are listening today. I do encourage you to read it because I believe it is incredibly well written and it explains certainly the recommendations of staff very clearly. I could ask questions and we could talk through some things that you've already explained. I'm not going to do that. In part because I certainly have clarity from where you are coming. And also, I know that other commissioners, I'm sure, and I want to sort of get out of the way of other commissioners. I know they've put a lot of effort into this and don't want to get in that way. I just would rather, I'm just going to take a brief moment to explain where I land on this issue. And sometimes with these I find it easier for me anyway to kind of try to back up a little bit and take a broader view. And to do that, and I don't do this often, but I found how you wrote the draft order incredibly compelling. And I do, at the risk of taking a paragraph out of context, which is why I'm encouraging everyone to read. It's not that long an order. I'm encouraging everyone to read it. But I am going to just read a paragraph because it is something that really does speak to me, and I think it captures my opinion on this item more than any else. And I actually don't find this decision difficult for me. I know that may be a little odd to hear. I don't find it a tough decision at all. I can understand disappointment in the decision, but I don't find any difficulty in the decision. And here's why. And these are your words, Liz. Where the federal government puts insurmountable obstacles in the way of a CLCPA objective, the state's policies will be frustrated and progress necessarily limited to those things that can be accomplished without federal support or cooperation. Burdening the ratepayers of New York State with costs of the magnitude reported by the NYSO, $7.9 billion to $23.9 billion, without any certainty as to when they will receive the benefits of the offshore wind energy that the CLCPA seeks to secure, is unjustifiable. You are 100% right. It is unjustifiable. And I know that there will be disappointment. I get that. Again, not a difficult decision for me at all. I will be supporting the item, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz, for the very clear presentation you made. I don't think you wanted to make it. I do have some questions. The purpose of asking them is to just so that we're crystal clear on some of the thinking here. You explained, I think, very clearly what happens if we do nothing, but why do we have to do this now? And by now, I mean this summer.
Thanks for that question, Commissioner. The reason we have to do this now is because the process is driven by the NYSO and the NYSO's tariff. And under that tariff, they are going to complete their evaluation later this year in the fall, and they are going to present their recommendation to their board around the end of the year. And that time frame is driven by the tariff process.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with the lawsuit that New York is part of, along with, I think, 16 other states, against the federal government over offshore wind. Can't the feds point to this action as evidence that New York does not believe its own case has merits?
So, good morning, Commissioner Majori. John Sipos over here. Let me try to address that question. And the short answer is no. No. This action before the Commission today is separate from the issues in the litigation in the lawsuit that's going on in Boston, which concerns the federal executive order directing all federal agencies to indefinitely pause and cease federal agency regulatory review and permitting of onshore and offshore wind projects. And the complaints there in that litigation asked the court to vacate the January executive order that directed the indefinite cessation. And that litigation will continue on its own course. Recently, the judge rejected a motion to dismiss the entire case, and that case will continue on. So, turning to the matter before this Commission here today in Albany, the draft order here seeks to protect New York ratepayers. And I think Commissioner Valesky put his finger on one of the operative sections of the draft order, and that's what this order is doing, protecting New York ratepayers.
Thank you. My next question, it might also be to you. How is this order consistent with the CLCPA?
Hi, Commissioner Majori. I'll take this one. And I would say that it's consistent in that it's neutral as to the state's ability to achieve the 9 gigawatt offshore wind target, but also recognizes the impact that federal regulatory uncertainty has on an individual state's ability to build these types of resources. In a larger sense, if there is an impact to the state's goals, it's caused by the federal government's action, not the decision to withdraw this PPTN.
Okay. So my next question is basically getting at the same thing. And does approval of this order put a stop to New York's plan for offshore wind?
Well, to echo my colleague, Ms. Waldorf, no. This decision, the decision to terminate the PPTN review and selection process, is not what is disrupting development of New York's offshore wind program. Instead, as I hope we made clear in the draft order, it's the federal government that has imposed a halt on further offshore wind project permitting and construction. And that is the action that is impeding future wind projects that would support New York and New York's goals. This particular action here before you is not about putting ratepayers on the hook for the significant, is about not putting ratepayers on the hook for the significant cost and risk of developing transmission resources that serve only one purpose, which is to interconnect future offshore wind generation, when it's simply uncertain when those resources will be able to be developed and constructed and, again, delivered to the grid.
Thank you. Does New York State have a larger plan for achieving the CLCPA clean energy and emission reduction mandates of the CLCPA in light of the new federal paradigm? I feel like this order should be of a piece with a larger all-of-government approach that's not necessarily directly addressed in the order.
Sure, and it's a very good question. Taking a big step back, I would say that there are a lot of other efforts that are supporting achieving the state's clean energy resources, much of which is led by this commission and department. And also recognizing some of the comments that have been made by the chair and the other commissioners so far. The plans for the offshore wind industry were well over a decade in the making and were dashed in a flash by action taken by our federal government. The draft order recognizes the need to take a step back and review our current plans, especially given the uncertainty facing the offshore wind industry. And specifically, the draft order directs staff to do two things. First, to take the lessons learned from the New York City PPTN process and construct a path forward for the responsible, cost-effective, and timely deployment of transmission and offshore wind generation resources as part of the procurement process that was directed in the Commission's recent Clean Energy Standard Biennial Review Order, where we're taking a step back and looking at all of the different procurement processes that we have for various resources and what the best path forward is. The second thing that it directs staff to do is that it recognizes the need that offshore wind was meant to fill for the New York City power generation fleet and reliability needs, and directs staff to continue identifying the clean energy generation solutions that will help meet those needs in New York City, and proceed with the ongoing work that staff and many others across the state are doing in the coordinated grid planning process to identify the necessary transmission infrastructure projects. And with that, those two actions, I think, will set us up for success moving forward. And again, I think we've learned a lot in this current process that will help us think strategically about transmission and offshore wind moving forward.
Thank you, Jess. My final two questions, the chair alluded to the answers to these two questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway, just for the sake of crystal clarity. The first is, if we pull down this PPTN, and then offshore wind once again becomes realistic, can we get back on track quickly?
The short answer is yes. As I mentioned, the draft order establishes further process to ensure that staff and the commission are ready to proceed when we have more certainty about the timeline for offshore wind generation. The draft order gives us some time to consider, all of the lessons, as I mentioned, that we've learned through the New York City PPTN process and incorporate them into our planning efforts. We're going to explore options to design an optimal solution for the integration of offshore wind and transmission into New York City that balances both cost and risk, as well as reliability. And, that assessment may result in the identification of alternate models to developing offshore wind transmission infrastructure, both as to, supply and delivery, especially given the uncertainty that we've been faced with for this industry and the experience gained to date.
Okay. And my final question, I do have some remarks, but again, the chair answered this before I asked it. Can't we simply pause procurement and construction work until the timeline for development is certain?
We, of course, Commissioner, we among the many things we looked at that question, and the answer is no. The NYSO process does not give us the ability to simply to pause the process, the procurement, and the construction work until a timeline is more certain. This PPTN, based on this Commission's original order in 2023, is tied to an in-service date for the transmission infrastructure in 2033. As noted in the draft order, staff considered potential pathways for the PPTN that commenters suggested, such as a pause to the current schedule. But changing the schedule would be a modification, and any of the suggested modifications, including extending the in-service date, would require the Commission to modify its previous determination and order, and for the NYSO to restart the solicitation process. Doing so in this environment would expose ratepayers to just too much risk. A restart to the process would require the Commission to revisit the design assumptions on which the PPR order was based, and under the present conditions of uncertainty, we would not know what assumptions to use in determining design or operational parameters for the transmission facility. Among other factors, the Commission would be unable to specify a new in-service date, and any cost estimates developed without a reasonably supported schedule for the work would be highly speculative. This would introduce unjustifiable uncertainties into the cost estimates provided by developers, among other things, and would expose ratepayers to excessive risk and significant costs.
Thank you. That's it for my questions. I do have some comments. We live at a moment of a philosophical battle is going on between those vying to wield the levers of governmental power at all levels. The battle is not between right and left, but between empiricism and magical thinking. You can tell the difference by what type of invisible things the combatants are concerned with. Secret conspiracies and supernatural interventions, or disease and climate change. This commission and the government of the state of New York for several years now, and under multiple leadership manifestations, has led the nation and has made a mark on the world in its recognition of climate change as a matter of great concern, requiring action that comes at a cost on all levels of government and society. This shouldn't be too difficult a case to make. This month, it's killer flash floods in Texas, the Grand Canyon on fire, air quality alerts across upstate New York because of vast forest fires in Canada, and erratic, unnatural weather right here in the capital region. All the while cuts to the National Weather Service and the canceling of climate reporting will help ensure that we have little more than our own experience to have any sense of what's going on around us. I don't need to say more on this. Just ask yourself if this is what we experienced when we were growing up. If you're an adult and you're being honest with yourself, we all know the answer. The problem is tough and made tougher because no single person, no single state, and not even a single country can solve it. New York was on track to meet its 9-gigawatt offshore wind goal until the federal government changed course. But it's true that even if we met our goal, that would not stop the increasingly brutal heat of summers, the increasingly frequent calamitous blizzards of winter, the Canadian fire weather that has changed our very air, the more erratic and destructive hurricanes, the deadly floods, and so much more that we are witnessing and experiencing in real time. Our answer, New York's answer, has been to do as much as we can within our power. Frankly, I am one of those who thinks we can and should do even more. But there has been remarkable consistency among those who have held decision-making authority in New York across institutions that the climate crisis is real and should be addressed. That's a starting point, and New York has, over the years, advanced far beyond the starting point. But there's an alternative promise being offered by the current management in Washington of a peace with its larger approach to all manner of public policy challenges, its answer to the difficult nature of addressing such challenges is to deny that they exist. Actually, that's an understatement. The governing philosophy in Washington embraces self-destructive policies and self-destructive personal behavior masquerading as liberation. Freud had this concept called thanatos, the death instinct. I'm not a psychologist or an expert on Freud, but my understanding of the idea is that we humans are torn between a drive towards life with all of its complexities and challenges and a fundamental drive that aims to reduce tension that ultimately leads to death, thanatos. At this moment, we have entered an age of thanatocracy, where under federal leadership we seek to release tension by embracing fossil fuels, gas-guzzling vehicles, drill, baby, drill, energy efficiency rollbacks, fetishizing high-pressure shower heads and big toilets, and yes, villainizing renewable energy, especially wind. Freud could have predicted it, as he proposed that we secretly long to return to an inorganic state, representing the ultimate state of zero tension. But we should not respond with our own form of magical thinking. Sustaining a zombie process that could result in transmission lines to nowhere will not help us achieve our 9-gigawatt legal mandate. It will just end up costing already stressed ratepayers more money, for which they will get nothing in return. I am frustrated by this item today, but I can't argue with it. I will also say this. There are more tough choices on the horizon, but without a change in law, those choices will not necessarily be limited to multiple options that would exacerbate climate change, but rather will also include options that could mitigate growth, especially related to industries not envisioned at the time the CLCPA was signed. So I want to hear what my other colleagues have to say. I reserve the right to vote either way once I hear what they have to say, but I'm inclined to vote yes. But the story does not end here and now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Liz and Jess and Jalila, for the presentation. So I understand why we're doing this. I just want to walk through where I think we're at and what I think this means. So our current offshore wind resources are slated to bring about 1.8 gigawatts of offshore wind energy onto the grid. And that leaves about 7 gigawatts for us to reach by 2035 in the next 10 years. Is that right?
That's about right, yeah.
About right. Yeah. And this PPTN is for future procurements, not anything that's a current proposal.
That's right. It was designed and intended to collect the energy from future projects up to the balance of whatever would be needed to meet the 9-gigawatt target.
And more specifically, to build on that, doesn't impact any current proposals that are under consideration.
Right. And as Commissioner Majori just mentioned, and we would be able to restart this process if, say, July 2026, the federal government changed its mind and restarted opening up those leases. But at the moment, there are no offshore wind awardees that have not started construction in New York.
That's correct.
That's correct, yeah.
And so the only offshore wind that is sort of showing up on ratepayer bills maybe would be South Fork, because the others are still under construction.
Yeah, that's a very good point. South Fork is the only one, and that was a power purchase agreement through the Long Island Power Authority. The other two projects in active construction will not hit ratepayer bills until they're delivering energy into the grid.
Excellent. Yep. So I want to take another step back in understanding that our current offshore wind resources are not using these proposed transmission lines. Can you explain how much money this action saves ratepayers and how? So,
Sure. I shouldn't say that too lightly, but we don't, what we know about the costs of these proposals is, we have this wide-ranging estimates published by the NISO based on their review of the submissions. So we have between roughly $8 billion and 24.9, say, round it to 25 billion in cost estimates. If this configuration, the current configuration of the offshore generation and the PPCN, continue to be the right answer into the future, the winning transmission developer would be authorized to begin recovering costs during the development and construction of the process. That would under current FERC rate-making rules. And that cost estimate would be our only guide, because in the end, FERC, similar to this commission, the Federal Commission authorizes the recovery of all reasonably and prudently incurred costs. So there's no cap on the actual cost of a transmission project. And that was one of our concerns in looking at the options. What are other things we might do here as well? We would be sort of unleashing this potentially uncapped expenditure because FERC would allow that, and if things took longer, procurement took longer, more there were more complexities. There are lots of reasons, lots of things that can drive an ordinary transmission project's costs up, and here we had some really extraordinary risks to think about. So one of our concerns was we could not really have a very we could not really get a bead on what those costs would actually be. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was definitely we're opening up this box and we don't know where the bottom is.
Yeah, and then it would be showing up on ratepayer bills early.
Oh, right, because as I said, under FERC rules, the transmission developer could begin recovering costs along the way, yeah.
And that could be as early as September, November, when?
It would probably, if the project were selected at the end of this year, which is the schedule we have from the NISO, the project probably would go to FERC and make the relevant filings to begin recovering its development and construction costs, and that could happen, any time after that.
Right. Okay, thank you, Liz, for that. I want to switch gears a little bit now to talk about our overall state targets. And first, I just want to recognize that we've had a number of ups and downs trying to get where we need to go. And our efforts are working to bring down costs by producing energy locally. Energy that, once established, isn't subject to political or geopolitical whims. We want to reduce emissions because of the constant devastation and cost that is always increasing because of the crisis of climate change, which, unless we act, will continue to repeatedly damage our infrastructure, which we have to pay for. And through emission reductions, we're working to improve the health and well-being of our fellow New Yorkers through better, more accessible jobs, cleaner air, and more enjoyable environments for people to live their lives. Now, 1.8 gigawatts is no small thing, and that's the most in the nation, is that right?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah. For US, yeah.
Yeah, And South Fork, which you mentioned, Liz, is the first utility-scale wind farm in the nation as well.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. So New York is one of this country's most important economic engines. And despite losing 3 years to the devastating impacts of COVID-19, which took hold a little over 6 months after the CLCPA was signed into law, despite this, we've managed to build a few big things. These wind farms that are under construction or that we've already built will be the beginnings of careers for some New Yorkers and will bring generational wealth and career opportunities for generations. And I think that that's important to remember. So I want to move a little bit to our progress to goals, which we talked about from our biennial review a couple of months ago, and especially the 70 by 30 goal. Now, right now, we're forecasting a gap, and that forecast is based on loads we expect to see on commercial, industrial, residential electrification, and some potential on the vehicle electrification side. That's right?
Yeah, that's correct. I would say that even the forecast that was pulled together for the last biennial review is stale at this point. Forecasts are just as they are intended to be, a look into the future and the best guess at where we're going to land. In the ongoing state energy planning process, there will be updated analysis that will likely change that forecast even further in terms of the total electric load requirements in the year 2030. And so in the next biennial review, we'll be just like we had intended in the last one, every couple of years reassessing our progress towards our targets. But it is definitely a moving target.
Yeah. And so it can be below or above what we're expecting. It could be right on target, but below or above what we're expecting. And so I think most of what I have to say next is mostly no questions, mostly comments. So as you guys know, I'm extremely concerned about Zone J and Zone K for that matter. And we can't meet our targets without these zones. And for me, keeping peaker plants online is not the answer. They are the most expensive and most carbon-intensive resources that we have, and they are right in the middle of densely populated communities. So we need to assess our alternatives and use the tools we have at our disposal and more to bring down costs, fight climate change, and increase reliability. I hope to see a doubling down on our resources and our stacking of solutions. This includes, of course, demand-side management, flexible resources, energy efficiency, demand response, shaving peak demand and injecting energy into the system when it's needed most with energy storage, using the coordinated grid planning process, like you guys mentioned, and the proactive planning process to approach load growth and capacity upgrades from a system-wide view, using our Grid of the Future proceeding to build a grid that is dynamic, where power doesn't just flow one way. And we're taking full advantage of the distributed energy resources, grid-enhancing technologies, dispatchable emission-free resources, and technology advancements, and coordinating to help us understand and plan around the data that we're currently collecting. We can't change what's already happened. We've had projects not work out. If some of those projects had worked out, we would not have the gaps that we have right now. But that's spilt milk. We have to adapt and we have to pivot, but we can't take our eye off the prize. Ever forward, ever upward, setbacks may be inevitable, but it's what we do to recover that will define us. We can't change the past, but we can build a better future, and DPS is uniquely positioned and uniquely suited to build that future. We have the authority and the expertise while also being fiercely dedicated to our focus on ratepayer impacts. We also have the ability to bring people together to solve this problem. So while one door might be closed, another 10 might be open. I want to point out ordering clause 3 in this order as one that I think is extremely important. The vision of a cost-effective, carbon-free, highly resilient energy system is still in front of us. And we will only get there if we work together in lockstep for the benefit of all New Yorkers. So while I'm disappointed with this action, I look forward to being a part of how we bounce back. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. Last, I get cleanup. So I want to thank Liz, Jessica, Jalila, you guys. I may be guilty of the emotion that Commissioner Valesky spoke of. You know, this, as everybody has stated, it's
You and me both, Commissioner.
this has really been a tough one, really very tough. And my fellow commissioners have asked almost all of my questions, which you have all very much covered. There's a couple maybe finer points that I just want to touch on. John knows I'm looking at him. So to the why now part, the ISO process, you answered that, Liz, that there's a timeline. But with respect to the state's lawsuit on the Trump administration's actions, is there a sense of expected timing around that, John?
So with litigation, as with many things in life, it's difficult to predict with any certainty. But I can provide the following update. 2 weeks ago, the judge of the United States denied a portion of the federal government's motion to dismiss the entire case. And so there are claims revolving around the Administrative Procedure Act that the judge has allowed to go forward, and there will be opportunities for the parties to engage on that in the coming months, over the next few months. It is, as I said, difficult to predict when the judge, when the trial court judge will make the court's decision. And as is the case sometimes in litigation, there is always the possibility for appeal. So I do not believe it's going to be resolved imminently. I hope that provides enough sense
No,
to you.
it does, and I will add it to the pile of uncertainty that we've got in front of us. So, which there's no shortage of. So, Commissioner Bright talked a little bit about with you, Liz, about the offshore wind projects that we've currently got in front of us. The projects that have received federal approvals to date, is my understanding, South Fork's already in operation, Empire Wind 1, Sunrise Wind. So those three projects. Those three projects do not rely, well, obviously South Fork's already operating. The other two, Empire and Sunrise, do not rely on this PPTN.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful, it was helpful for me in the education process to understand how those projects connect and how that's financed.
Those projects each connects radially. In other words, each offshore wind platform is building its own transmission, its own individual transmission line to some point on the shore. And I wish I could just recite off the top of my head the actual interconnection points, but I can't. But that's the design, is each wind platform has its own dedicated line connecting to the grid, which has been sort of the standard design up and down the East Coast until New York and New Jersey began exploring this other concept, which is reflected in the PPTN, of collection infrastructure for multiple platforms. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, it does. And go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, just one more thing to expand, because you also asked about how those projects are financed. And so that's an important distinction that I would agree with you is good to make here. The offshore wind projects, Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise, included transmission as part of their proposal to the NYSERDA solicitation. And because those solicitations are structured to make REC payments once those facilities are operational, there's no cost that's incurred to New York State ratepayers until those projects are actually delivering into the grid for both the generation and the transmission infrastructure. It's a very important distinction to make in light of today's decision, where the reverse is true. If we were to allow the transmission project to proceed, they could start incurring costs well before those projects are actually delivering into the grid and well before the transmission project is even built.
Thank you. Okay, so understanding that landscape, NYSERDA also has a solicitation that's pending, which is the offshore wind 4. None of those connect to through this PPTN. And then the future one will likely not, that was tied to this, would have to be scrapped. If I'm understanding this, or
Sure.
revised?
Yep. So It is, it's the fifth solicitation, and if you recall, there was
Yes, it's actually
cancellations
six.
and
Yeah,
new.
yeah.
So we're currently in the midst of New York 5. That solicitation process concluded last fall, and awards have not been finalized or made by NYSERDA. A good way to look at it is that solicitation, this public policy transmission need project wasn't available as a solution at the time of that solicitation. The plan was for the next solicitation, New York 6, to be the first solicitation where developers could utilize the New York City PPTN as a point of interconnection.
Helpful, thank you. Okay, so that's understanding the impact of this on existing and potential future. So thank you for that. We talked a lot about, my fellow commissioners raised the questions about looking at the PPTN review process. There's no off-ramp, there's no ability to pause, if we were to modify the in-service date, push out the date, it would essentially require the restarting. Okay, got all that. The one thing I don't think we covered was, and I believe I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and it's, could we continue to work on planning and phase this so that we're continuing the work on planning and put off the more costly construction phases? So a basically phased approach.
Well, we thought about that too. Frankly, we're in a box. There is no way under the tariff to break the project down into phases. The winning transmission developer has the right to build the project, and in a normal world, it would be in our interest to have them build and build expeditiously, because they would be staying close to their original estimates. They would be building efficiently. And so in a normal world, that would be our paradigm was, yep, go, do it. We simply don't have, there's no mechanism in the NYSO tariff. Absent a restart, there's no way to take these proposals and execute in phases.
Okay. Okay, and then so the last one is just with respect to reliability. The New York ISO's most recent resource needs assessment, RNA, forecasts reliability concern for New York City by 2033. That's assuming that CHIPPE, the Champlain Hudson Express, happens on time. And this PPTN, it didn't, fortunately, the RNA doesn't assume this PPTN, so that's a good thing. The PPTN was intended to integrate almost 5,000 megawatts of offshore wind to New York City by 2033, which would have conveniently alleviated that specific reliability concern and left a lot of room. So I just want to, we've talked about it, but I want to hit this very squarely in terms of how we intend to move forward to address reliability concerns in New York City, since this was going to be part of that solution.
Sure, absolutely. I would say the order recognizes the importance of ensuring reliability needs in New York City, and it's something that staff and this commission certainly doesn't take lightly in terms of our responsibility to do so. The project that we're discussing today was, uniquely tied to offshore wind. And offshore wind was a tool that we had in our tool chest, if you will, for meeting future reliability needs, but also to decarbonize the existing power generation fleet. When we look at the RNA, there are a lot of assumptions in there in terms of retirements and, other facilities that, to Commissioner Bright's comments, we've been building a vision to do so. This is a big disruption to that vision. I think, we do have a lot of reliability planning processes in place between the New York Independent System Operator, with our partners at NYSERDA. All of those things are going to continue. And I think the order before you today references some of those processes. It's incumbent upon us to tie them all together in a way that makes sense to the average New Yorker, the average New York City New Yorker in this instance. And we certainly are going to do so. But it's a combination of a lot of things. It is looking at transmission assets that may be needed to bring energy into New York City. It's looking at generation resources and what we can do locally, to Commissioner Bright's earlier comments. And at the end of the day, it is a statewide grid that is all interconnected. So while New York City faces its own unique reliability challenges, the state as a whole also needs reliability. And so when we look at things, it's not just looking at it New York City alone, but looking at how we can integrate other resources to the broader grid to solve those challenges.
Okay, totally agree. Okay, I actually do have one other question. With respect to the stakeholder engagement on this, can you just talk a little bit about what we've been doing on stakeholder engagement with respect to the PPTN?
Sure, I'll take this, and Liz can jump in as well. There are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in the PPTN process, as well as all of the other reliability planning processes we discussed. Those are, everything from other sister state agencies, many of which put an incredible amount of time into this process that I think we should recognize. They include transmission developers, utilities, generators, advocates, all of which certainly have been following the work that the New York Independent System Operator is doing and that staff has been doing. There have been a number of technical conferences, meetings between, all the different stakeholders to, provide input into the process as to where we got to date. We certainly, didn't reach out to those stakeholders to say the direction the commission was going to take on this item, for obvious reasons, but also because it is a difficult decision. But, I think in addition to just this standalone process, we are going to continue working with all of those stakeholders. And one of the things I think the draft order does a good job of addressing is everybody will need to have a seat at the table in terms of what we do next. And so while stakeholders have been involved in this one standalone process, those same stakeholders, as well as a myriad of others, are going to be crucial to figuring out what we do next. And we're committed to doing so.
Since you gave me the opportunity, I just want to emphasize what Jessica said about our sister state agencies. Beginning in 2023, at this commission's invitation, they have formed a group, a cable working group that has been working on providing input to the NISO on the PPTN. As outside of their regular jobs, they have been through all 28 of the submitted proposals. And they've just done tremendous work and been tremendously supportive. And it was an experiment on our part to see if we could pull that off. And I'm almost more distressed at having to disappoint them because they really showed up in a big way to help here.
Thank you. All right, I have just a brief statement too. Well, maybe not that brief, but okay. I have honestly struggled with this order for a number of reasons, beginning with my personal commitment to advancing clean energy solutions to meet the state's growing electricity demand, as well as my strong history in exercising the state's right with respect to energy and environmental policy and programs. Throughout my 35-plus year career working in environmental and energy policy, the general operating relationship between the state and the federal government has been the federal government sets the floor or minimum standards, and states are permitted to exercise their right to self-govern and to go beyond these requirements, shaping solutions that work for a given state. In this way, states have been able to act as laboratories for innovation, often developing models for the rest of the nation. Look no further than the fact that half of the young people in this room don't know what acid rain is, as evidenced Exhibit A and states' abilities to take on challenges. Under the current federal administration, this modus operandi has been dramatically altered, and states' abilities to innovate and pursue state-based solutions are being greatly constrained. Nowhere is that more evident than in the offshore wind industry, where the current federal administration has reversed course on what has been a dual sovereignty federal partnership supporting the development of offshore wind, a scientifically sound, globally proven technology. The result is that states like New York that have embraced this valuable technology as a means to modernize and decarbonize their electric grid are being negatively impacted in their efforts to pursue state goals. Given my background, I have been on a quest to find a way forward for this PPTN and to ensure our continued progress. My first reaction to the draft order was that we should seek to pause or modify the PPTN to delay the in-service date beyond 2033. But as staff has very well discussed, this would require us to determine what a reasonable future in-service date should be. The ISO would need to do a new solicitation, and new design parameters would need to be developed without any certainty about when the federal halt on offshore wind leasing and permitting might be lifted. Also, as has been discussed, under the PPTN model, costs for planning and construction of the transmission lines would begin to be imposed on ratepayers upon the PPTN's approval, not upon its completion or in-service date. This dynamic simply introduces too great a risk for ratepayers given the federal government's current posture on offshore wind. As much as I want to ensure the state's continued progress on its efforts to bring offshore wind to New York State, I don't want to saddle ratepayers with the cost of a transmission line that could end up being a proverbial bridge to nowhere. While I acknowledge stakeholder comments that transmission costs will likely only go up over time, I find the immediate ratepayer risk outweigh this concern. With respect to reliability, I share the concerns raised by my fellow commissioners and stakeholders about grid reliability, particularly in New York State. Or in New York City, excuse me. As discussed, the ISO in its last RNA projects a reliability concern in New York City in 2033, 8 years from today. This PPTN was intended to interconnect 5,000 megawatts of new offshore wind generation to New York City, and that new offshore wind would have more than addressed that identified reliability need. Without new offshore wind generation, it's clear that we will need to rethink how we will ensure the continued reliability of the grid, not just in New York City, but across New York. Importantly, the order directs staff to work with the ISO, NYSERDA, Con Edison, and other stakeholders to identify potential generation and transmission distribution system solutions to ensure grid reliability. My final comment is regarding just a concern and recommendation going forward. I believe that we would have benefited from additional stakeholder engagement, particularly after the release of the Trump administration memo. I understand the difficulty in doing that, but I do think that's really important, given the major headwinds we face at the federal level, that we engage in a very meaningful, robust, collaborative process with stakeholders in this regard. So just with that said, I am going to support the order, and I look forward to working with staff as we take on these remaining challenges. I also really want to thank the staff for working with me and spending a lot of time with me to get my concerns addressed and to do what I think makes the order even stronger. So thank you.
Thank you. Now do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations contained in the draft order discussed. Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
The item is approved, and then the recommendation is adopted. We'll now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on today's consent agenda, beginning with Commissioner Alisi?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
No comments or recusals.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
No recusals. I do want to comment on item 165, matter 23G0676, which has to do with the long-term gas plans for Central Hudson. I would like to note that in voting for this item, I am not, and this commission is not, approving or rejecting Central Hudson's long-term gas plan. My understanding is that Central Hudson modeled multiple scenarios and prefers what it calls its no new infrastructure or NNI plan over others, including a plan that relies more heavily on electrification, which it calls the CLCPA approach scenario. The NNI scenario involves the use of existing infrastructure currently being used for gas to be maintained, but instead be used for RNG or hydrogen, or to still be used for gas in order to replace other more polluting sources of energy. Central Hudson contends that the NNI scenario results in the greatest greenhouse gas emission reductions of all of the scenarios. In voting for this order today, I am not commenting one way or another on my agreement or disagreement with Central Hudson's assessment of which is the best scenario. This order is limited in scope and should not be read into as committing us to future approval or rejection of Central Hudson's preferred long-term plan. That's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bryant?
No comments or recusals. Thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes, I am recusing from item 381 and item 382, and no other comments.
Just to confirm, 381 and 382?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes on all items with the exception of items 381 and 382, from which I am recused.
Thank you. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Madam Secretary, is there anything else to come before us today?
There's nothing more today.
Thank you very much. And with that, I adjourn our session. Thank you all.